KL family, what's going on? When you come in, just say something, say hi. I'm not going to be on here long. I know we just had Revive Night and we have Midnight Prayer. Sarah, how are you? We just had Revive Night. Now we have Walking Through the Bible. Then we have Midnight Prayer tonight. So I'm not going to be on here long. Just going to briefly run through these um, for the Walking Through the Bible and get off of here. So I'm not going to wait for anybody to come on. They can come to check on the replay. But so what I'm going to do is, the chapters I'm going to go over is Psalm 17, Psalms 35, Psalms 54, and Psalm 63. Just going to read a little bit of it, give some commentary, and then move on. So starting with Psalm 17, when you look at the Bible says it's a prayer of David. I tried to do some research to see what is necessarily going on in David's life at that point in time to see what he's going through. But I've gotten mixed reviews or mixed things about it. That sometimes they said they thought he was going through stuff with Saul and other things that was going on in his life. But nevertheless, it's a prayer from David. So Psalm 17, verse 1 and 2, it says, Hear a just cause, O Lord, attend to my cry. Give ear to my prayer, which is not from deceitful lips. Let my vindication come from your presence. Let your eyes look on the things that are upright. So when you say hear a just cause, O Lord, it's a common phrase in Psalms. David again prayed, it seems, when you just read the whole entire chapter, is that he's praying from a time of crisis, or he's praying from a time of trial or tribulation, or however you want to necessarily word it. But he's praying from a time of something going on in his life. And he began his appeal to God, declaring the justice of his cause, right? He declared what his cause is and the uprightness of his cause, and he believed God that God had every reason to attend to his cry, and because his cause was just. So he believed God had a reason to attend to his cry, had a reason to listen to what he had to say, because his reasoning behind the cause was just. So if we jump down, and then it says, I want to point out that it says, he says something about deceitful lips. So it says, give ear to my prayer, which is not from deceitful lips. So deceitful lips, it's not something that it's not caused of trickery. It's not caused. This is why we know that his cause was just. It's not something that was just from something that he was lying about, or he was over exaggerating. It was non-deceitful in his lips. So verse 2, 3, and 4 says, you have tested my heart, and you have visited me in the night, and you have tried me and have found nothing. I have purposed that my mouth shall not transgress concerning the works of men by the word of your lips. I have kept away from the paths of the destroyer. So the first thing he says, you have tested my heart. David invited the test in previous verses. Here he speaks of having passed the test. So you have tested my heart. You have tested my cause. You have tested what I am doing. You have tested that my cause is just, and you have visited me in the nighttime. So he had a visitation. He had a cause with God. He had a communication with God. He had a conversation with God. He had a visitation with him. And God has tried him and found nothing. He has found that he had no guile. He had no beguile. He had no deceitfulness in him. He had no trickery or anything else. What he was crying about, or what he was transgressing about, it was just in its fullness. It also says, I have purposed that my mouth shall not transgress. David was careful to not speak in a sinful way about his crisis. So he was careful to the way he spoke about his crisis, which is very good, because a lot of times we go through crisis, and the very first thing is we speak something opposite of what we want to see. So when we're going through trials and we're going through tribulations, we say X, Y, and Z, which we already know that our words form our world. So we have to watch what we say and how we say it, so that we don't, even though we're going through bad times, or going through crisis, or we're going through transgressions, that we understand that we cannot sin, or we cannot speak opposite of what we want to happen, or what we see happen, or what our faith says, or what our God says, compared to what our situation says. So this is what David meant when he says, I have purpose in my mouth to not transgress. He's purpose in his mouth to not speak in a sinful way against Christ. He could speak in a way that might deceive others or himself, or promote his own cause at the expense of God's justice. Yet David purposed that it would not be so. By the word of your lips, I have kept away from the paths of the destroyer. This was one reason why David was good at this kind of strong self-analysis. He lived by the words of God's lips. He knew and loved and lived God's word. So he knew what God's words was. He loved God's word, and he lived by it. So this is why he said, "It's by the word of your lips I have kept from the path. I have kept from the path of going down the wrong way. I've kept from the path of the destroyer." I'm going to go through a couple more scriptures, then we're going to go to the next chapter. Verse 5 says, "Uphold my steps in your path, that my footsteps may not slip." Uphold my steps. David felt that he was in danger of falling or slipping into disaster. He needed God to hold his steps that he may not slip. So he needed God to hold him up so that he would not slip. He wouldn't fall. He wouldn't go a wrong way. It's the same as I think he needed God to hold him up. He needed God to order his steps so he would not fall, so he would not slip. So I want you to read the rest of this chapter. I'm not going to go through everything. I like to pick out certain things and kind of go through it and give you just what the gist of the chapter is. But he's going through some trials and going through some tribulations, and he's asking God concerning it. So Psalms 35. The Psalms 35 is titled, a Psalm of David. This is one where what are commonly known as imprecatory psalms, which is in strong terms, ask God to defeat destroy the enemies of his people. As you read through the book of Psalms, the imprecatory psalms become more intense. Right? So verse 1 through 3, it says, "Plead my cause, O Lord, with those who strive with me. Fight against those who fight against me. Take hold of shield and buckler and stand up for my health. Also draw out the spear and stop those who pursue me. Say to my soul, I am your salvation." So he's asking God to, David is praying against his adversaries, those who seek to kill him, those who seek to destroy him. He's asking God to be his shield and buckler. God asking God to just fight against him. To fight for him against his adversaries, to draw out the spear and to stop those. So it says, "Plead my cause, O Lord, with those who strive against me." Many adversaries fought against David, and many were the times he prayed, "Fight against those who fight against me." He could rightly pray this prayer because he generally lived in God's will, and those who fought against him were opposed to God. So it's when he says, "Fight against those who fight against me," it's God has David's back, and because he lived in the very will of God, then whenever you went against somebody of God that lives in God's will, you are not only just going against them, but you are also going against God, because they live in God's will. They operate in his will. They operate in his word. That's what they do. So it's not against just David that the adversaries were coming against. They were coming against also God. It says, "Take hold of your shield and buckler and stand up for my help." With vivid images, David called upon God to put on his armor and fight on David's behalf. We often think God having armor. We often don't think God of having armor, but he does. Isaiah 59:17 says, says of the Lord, "For he put on righteousness as a breastplate and a helmet of salvation on his head. He put on the garments of vengeance for clothing and was a clad of zeal as cloak." So when David says to take hold of your shield and buckler and stand up for my help, he was asking God to take hold of his weapons of war and fight alongside of him a bit against the adversaries that were coming up against him. So this was a time in David's life where he was having great trials and great tribulation, a great warfare, and he was like he was coming upon every side. Every situation was coming up, and he was asking God to stand up on his behalf and fight on his behalf. So I'm going to do a couple more scriptures. Verse 4-8 says, let those be put to shame and brought to dishonor who seek after my life. Let those who turn back and brought to confusion, who plot my hurt. Let them be like chaff before the wind. Let the angel of the Lord chase them. Let their way be dark and slippery, and let the angel of the Lord pursue them. For without cause they have hidden their net for me in a pit, which they have dug without a cause for my life. Let destruction come upon them unexpectedly, and let his net that he has hidden catch himself into that very destruction. Let him fall. So going back to verse 4, it says, let those be put to shame and brought to dishonor who seek after my life. Let those who turn back and brought to confusion who plot my hurt. So David was very specific with what he wanted God to do. He wasn't just general, okay, God, just kill him. He was, Frankie, how are you, sir? Pastor Frankie. So David was very specific with what he wanted and how he wanted God to avenge him, or how he wanted God to fight them. He said, let them be like chaff before the wind, and let the angel of the Lord chase them. Let their way be dark and slippery, and let the angel of the Lord pursue them. So he was very specific with how he wanted God to pursue them, or how he wanted God to fight on his behalf. Oftentimes we are not very specific in what we ask of God. We just say, God, just make it work some kind of way, just make it work any way that you see fit. But David here was very specific with what he wanted from God. He made his petition known from what he wanted of God. So he also said, for without cause, they have hidden their net for me. There was no reason why they were coming up against David. They have no reason to fight against them or to become an adversary. It says, for without cause, they have hidden their net for me in a pit. So they tried to deceive him. So when you hide a net in a pit, it's like they're trying to have a trap for David to fall into. So it was without cause that they did it, for which they have dug without cause for my life. Let destruction come upon them unexpectedly. So let destruction come in a way that they would have never seen, that never thought of. And let his net that he has hidden catch himself. So let the same exact thing. Hey, Jasmine. Hey, Liz, teacher Liz. So that the same net that he has caused as a trap for David to now become a trap to the adversary who have now dug that pit and now set that net. It said, and let his net that he has hidden catch himself into that very destruction. Let him fall. So David's adversaries had planned destruction, and now David is praying that same destruction that he has made, that they have tried to trap him in, let them now boomerang it back onto themselves. Right. So David was very specific. So we have to be very specific with what we want and how we want God to fight on our behalf, and how we want God to provide, and how we want God to go forward with us, and how we want God to move us, and how we want God to speak to us. We have to be very specific. This is how we ask God for certain things, and we ask and we don't get what we are necessarily looking for because we didn't ask the right way. We weren't specific with what we wanted. So David was very specific with how he wanted God to handle his adversaries. He didn't just say, just do however you want to do with them. He was very specific. So that's Psalms 34. We're going to jump to Psalms 53. And I'm just doing some of these chapters. And I want you guys to, of course, you guys do the daily reading and go back and read this in the fullness of your own. I'm just pulling out, the very beginning, because the very beginning usually gives you what is going on and what's going on in the life of the believer or whoever's writing this. So Psalm 54 is titled, "To the Chief Musician with String Instruments, a contemplation of David when the Zephites went and said to Saul, is David not hiding with us?" They were actually two times when the Zephites betrayed David unto King Saul. First was in First Samuel 23, and the second was First Samuel 26. David escaped both times, but the circumstances of the psalm seem to best fit the circumstances of First Samuel 23, when David learned of the Zephite betrayal, but before the deliverance of God was displayed. And that's First Samuel 23, 26 through 27. So verse 1 and 2 says, "Save me, O God, by your name." Now remember, this is the time that the Zephites went to Saul and said, "Is David not hiding from us?" Right? So the Zephites betrayed David to King Saul. They betrayed him. So David is asking God to save me, O God, by your name, and vindicate me by your strength. Hear my prayer, O God. Give ear to the words of my mouth. So save me, O God, by your name, and vindicate me by your strength. In his distress, David relied upon the name and the strength of the Lord. The name and the strength of the Lord, right? So remember that the Bible says that the name of the Lord is a strong tower and the righteous may run into it, right? So it was in his distress that the name of the Lord and the strength of the Lord is what he called upon. The name speaks of the nature of God and the character of God. Strength speaks to his great power. So what David was asking was, he wanted to call on the nature and the character of God, which this is defined by his name. But when he wanted to speak to the power of God, he called on his strength. David knew that God's strength could respond to his need by what he knew of God's name. So based on what he knew of God's name is what he knew that God's strength would operate in. So the more he knew God's name, or how he knew God's name, would be how he responded in his strength, right? David knew that God's strength could respond to his need by what he knew of God's name. By your name, nothing less than the fullness of the manifested God is enough for the necessities of one poor man, is a quote that I found. But David knew that that if he called on God by his name, that he would come in the fullness of his strength, that he would come in the fullness of his strength. So God, and so what David did was speak to the nature and the character of God, knowing that if I spoke to his nature and his character, so basically who God is, because it's his name is who he is. So if I call on the name of the Lord, then God is going to come with what I need at the time of what I needed. So, right. So it says, hear my prayer, O God. It's common for David and others in prayers to merely ask God to hear or give ear to their cry. It is assumed that if the good and merciful God heard, that he would act. So he said, hear my prayers, right? So oftentimes you say, attend unto my prayers. Excuse me. So it's assumed that if God could just hear my prayers, that he would just operate or he would act on the behalf of his sons or his daughters or his or his kid, whoever you want to say. I was going to say something else, but I lost track of my mind. So it's the same exact thing of, you often hear somebody say, their prayers aren't going anywhere but to the ceiling, which is something we really shouldn't say, because we don't know if God is necessarily hearing their prayers or not hearing their prayers. But if God could just hear our prayers, then he would be such a merciful and good to attend to our prayers and move on behalf. So verse 3 says, for strangers have risen up against me and oppressors have sought my life. They have not set God before them. Selah. Selah means to take a break and think about to what happened or what was just said. So for strangers have risen up against me and oppressors have sought my life. So that notice that there is a separation between the two. It's strangers and oppressors, people I do not know, and people who are oppressing have sought to kill me. They have risen up against those strangers. People who I do not know have risen up against me. They have fought against me. They are coming up against me. And then now oppressors are seeking to kill me. They have not set God before them. Selah. So they have not set God before them. Their problems were not only in relation to David, but it was also relation to God. David made a point to say that they have not set God before them. Their rejection of David was just another way that they rejected God. We don't know if David specifically had Saul in mind, but it certainly fit a jealous king. It's jealous king, right? They have not set God before them. They didn't think about God. They didn't put God into their mind. They did not set God before them. So 4 and 5a, behold, God is a helper. The Lord is with those who uphold my life. He will repay my enemies for their evil. So he said, behold, so to look, God is my helper. The Lord is with those who uphold my life. So God is my helper, and he's with those who is with me, who uphold, who keep my life together, who is with me and fighting with me. And he will repay my enemies for their evil. So God is not only my helper, and he is not only with upholding those who are with me, or who is upholding my life and not oppressing and not strangers who have risen up against me, but he also is going to repay those strangers and oppressors with their own evil, right? So I'm going to skip to the last Psalms, which is Psalms 53. The title of this psalm is Psalm of David when he was in the wilderness of Judah. So I was looking this up, and a lot of people believe that either David's wilderness, this either belongs to David's wilderness years before he became came to the throne of Israel, or to his belief or his brief exile from the throne in the rebellion of Absalom. Right, the wilderness years when hunted by King Saul were preferred but not held with absolute certainty. So there is certain things to think about, but we don't know with absolute certainty what wilderness time this is. But nevertheless, let's go to verse 1 and 2. Oh God, you are my God. Early will I seek you. My soul thirsts after you. My flesh longs for you. In a dry and thirsty land where there is no water, so I looked for you in the sanctuary to see your power and your glory. So, oh God, you are my God. He's my God. Early will I seek you. So you are my God, and I shall seek you early. My soul thirsts after you, and my flesh longs for you. So there is a desire and a need for God, which is why he gets up early in the morning. When you want to get to something, and let's just put it in practical terms and make it applicable to our life now. When you are excited about, I don't know, hopefully not work, but when you're excited to go somewhere, you like to get there early. If you're excited about coming to church this Sunday for whatever reason, you like to get there early, get your seat, get ready, prepare yourself. So it's the same exact concept here. I have a desire, or David had a desire for God. It says, my soul thirsts after you and my flesh longs for you. It says, so because of that, I seek you early in the morning. Or early will I seek you in a dry and thirsty land where there is no water. So have I looked for you in the sanctuary to see your power and your glory. So it's in the sanctuary where David has looked to see his power and his glory. David sought God at the tabernacle to connect in some way with God's power and glory. Significantly, David was not at the tabernacle when he sang this song. He was in the wilderness of Judah. So how, we have to make that make sense. If he was in the wilderness of Judah, how did he seek his power and glory in the sanctuary? Yet he knew that God's sanctuary was not only a place, but a spiritual concept that we could enter into by faith, no matter where the person is. So David had the understanding before the New Testament, before we knew that the church was just a building and X, Y, and Z, that we say now, it's not just a building, it is a building, but we are the church and X, Y, and Z. David had the understanding that he could enter into the sanctuary of God by faith, no matter where he was. And if I entered into it by faith, that no matter where I am now, it has now become the sanctuary of God, because now God has came to see about me. God has came and entered into the room, or now God is aiming into the place of where I am at. And now this place has become the sanctuary of God. So verse 3 and 6, because loving kindness is better than life, my lips shall praise you. Thus I will praise you while I live. I will lift up my hands in your name. My soul shall be satisfied as with marrow and fatness, and my mouth shall praise you with joyful lips. Remember you, when I remember you on my bed, I meditate on you in the night watches. So because your loving kindness is better than life, I will praise you because how loving he is and how kind he is. My lips shall praise you and I will bless you while I live, no matter what he is going through and no matter how, what's going on in his life. And because he is in the wilderness, no matter what it is, he still dwelt on the loving kindness of God. And because he dwelt on the loving kindness of God, the righteous response was that my lips shall praise you and I will bless you while I live. I will lift up my hands in your name. My soul shall be satisfied with marrow and fatness. My soul shall be satisfied with marrow and fatness. David spoke of the satisfaction that too few people know even among believers. He spoke to the deep satisfaction that comes in a surrender seeking of God, of receiving his great love and of praising God without reservation. Right? When I remember you on my bed, I meditate on you I meditate on you in the night watches. David thought that there were not enough hours in a day to think upon the greatness and the goodness of God. Therefore, he also used the night watches to meditate on God. Think about that. David thought that there were not enough hours in a day to meditate on God. So what he did was at the nighttime where he should be asleep, when he should be resting, he took that time to meditate on the goodness and the greatness of our God. So I'm going to stop right there, but I want you to go back and read the rest of these chapters, do our daily reading so you can get the fullness of context. I hope I gave you some good snippets and, some good insight on what was going on in the life of David at these various times of crisis and tribulation or in the wilderness. But I've been on here way longer than I expected. I didn't want to be on this long, but just make sure that you are doing the daily reading, and we are going to be back. I'll be back in about 3 hours to do midnight prayer. So make sure that we're up for midnight prayer. Let's start our day with a bang. So KO family, I love you. I will see you in about 3 hours or 2 hours or so. Have a good night.